All right, so get ready, because today we're diving into a story that's as captivating as it is tragic, really.
Yeah.
The downfall of Oscar Wilde. You might know him for his incredible wit, those plays like The Importance of Being Earnest. But his life off stage, well, let's just say it was a drama in itself.
It really was.
And to guide us through this, we've got excerpts from a Rest is History podcast episode. So get ready to explore, well, Victorian London. A society really on the brink of change, and a man whose personal life kind of collided head-on with those changing morals.
Yeah, and what I find fascinating here is that Wilde's story, it's more than just a juicy scandal. It's a window into a time when the very definition of morality was shifting. And the consequences of those shifts, that could be devastating.
For sure. Okay, so let's set the stage. Oscar Wilde, right? Playwright, poet, a true cultural icon. I mean, he was like the rock star of his time.
Absolutely, yeah. Wilde was known for that sharp wit, his flamboyant personality, and of course his wildly successful plays. The Picture of Dorian Gray, even though it was controversial, it was a smash hit, and it explored those themes of beauty and morality and those hidden lives, right? The ones we often keep tucked away.
Yeah.
Very much so.
And it's almost eerie how those themes, that duality of public image versus private life, they end up mirroring Wilde's own story.
You're so right. It's like foreshadowing. And while Wilde was enjoying his success, society's understanding of sexuality was undergoing a major transformation. The term homosexuality was just starting to emerge. It was a shift away from seeing those same-sex acts simply as a sin, towards viewing them as a medical condition.
So still problematic, but a change nonetheless.
Exactly. And this changing landscape, this is crucial to understanding, Wilde's journey and the risks he was willing to take. Because remember, this is 1886, just 1 year after the Labouchere Amendment became law.
Okay, remind me about that amendment again.
Yeah, sure. So this amendment criminalized any act of gross indecency between men. Now, think about how vague that term is, right? Essentially, it gave the authorities a blank check to target anyone they deemed immoral. So you can imagine how this law must have felt, right? Like a sword hanging over Wilde's head.
Yeah, so Wilde is exploring his sexuality at a time when the legal stakes suddenly become much higher. Did this make him, more cautious at all?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. It seems the danger actually heightened the thrill for Wilde. He even famously referred to his relationships with men as feasting with panthers.
Wow, that's quite the image.
It is.
So he wasn't exactly laying low.
Not at all. He was engaging in affairs, often with younger men in specific parts of London known for such encounters. And the whispers about his behavior, well, they started growing louder and louder.
And those whispers eventually reached the ears of someone who wasn't going to stay quiet, right? The Marquis of Queensberry.
Yeah, the same Marquis who codified the rules of boxing. Wow.
Quite a volatile personality. Known for his confrontational nature. And as fate would have it, he was the father of Lord Alfred Douglas, better known as Bosie, who was Wilde's lover.
Oh boy, this can't be good. I'm sensing a clash of titans brewing here.
You're right to be concerned. The Marquis, he was furious about the relationship between his son and Wilde, and he went on a mission to expose Wilde, calling him a posing sodomite, even trying to disrupt the opening night of The Importance of Being Earnest.
Talk about a dramatic entrance. But if Wilde knew the Marquis was on his trail, why on earth would he decide to sue him for libel?
That's where Wilde's hubris comes into play. You see, he was convinced that his charm, his wit, would win over the courtroom, even though he knew the accusations were true. He wanted to protect his meticulously crafted public image, but it was a reckless gamble.
So he's betting everything on his ability to control the narrative. Exactly. And what's fascinating here is that Wilde underestimated his opponent. Edward Carson, the Marquis's lawyer, was a legal mastermind, really, known for his ruthless cross-examination skills.
It sounds like Wilde walked right into a trap.
You could say that.
So we left off with Oscar Wilde, right, making this bold, maybe even foolish decision to sue the Marquis of Queensberry for libel. And Wilde, the master of words, he thought he could outwit the entire legal system.
Yeah.
But he had no idea what he was truly up against.
Yeah, it's almost ironic, that Wilde's downfall began in the very place where he'd always triumphed, the courtroom. This is a man known for that razor-sharp wit, that ability to just command an audience.
Right.
But in the hands of a skilled opponent, someone like Edward Carson, well, that wit became a weapon, used against him.
Yeah, it's like watching a magician's own tricks being used to expose them.
Exactly, yeah. And Carson, he meticulously picked apart Wilde's testimony, highlighting contradictions, using Wilde's own flamboyant language to paint this picture of immorality.
Yeah.
And then came the turning point, the moment Wilde must have realized he was trapped.
What happened?
So Queensberry's legal team, they revealed they had this list of witnesses ready to testify, about their relationships with Wilde, young men, whose stories could shatter the carefully constructed facade Wilde had built around himself, and that realization that his private life, was about to be splashed across the front pages of every newspaper. I mean, it must have been terrifying.
Yeah, it's like the walls were closing in, right? All those whispers he tried to ignore suddenly becoming deafening.
Exactly. And at that point, Wilde made a fateful decision. He withdrew his libel case.
But wouldn't that make things even worse for him? I mean, the accusations are still out there.
You're absolutely right. The moment Wilde withdrew the case, a warrant was issued for his arrest. He was taken into custody at the Cadogan Hotel, and it's a scene that later inspired a poem, actually, by John Betjeman, capturing the stark contrast between Wilde's once glamorous life and the harsh reality he was now facing.
It's almost Shakespearean,
Yeah.
this sudden reversal of fortune, the public humiliation.
It is, and it's a stark reminder that fame and fortune, well, they can be fleeting, especially when societal norms are at stake.
Right. Okay. So Wilde's arrested. What were the specific charges against him?
Well, he was charged under that infamous Labouchere Amendment with gross indecency. And remember how we discussed, how vague that term was?
Right.
It essentially criminalized any intimacy between men. And the prosecution, they used this law to focus on Wilde's relationships with those young men, highlighting his spending habits and the power dynamics involved.
So they were painting him as a predator, someone who used his wealth and status to exploit others.
Exactly. They were crafting a narrative that played into the fears and the prejudices of Victorian society. And leading the charge was, once again, the brilliant and ruthless Edward Carson. He was a master at manipulating public opinion.
It sounds like Wilde was facing, an uphill battle from the very beginning. What happened during the first trial?
Well, at first, Wilde tried to use his wit and charm to deflect the accusations, almost as if he were still on stage, performing for an audience.
Right.
But as the trial progressed, that facade began to crumble. The weight of the evidence, the relentless questioning from Carson, it all took a toll.
So the man who was known for his words was ultimately silenced by them.
In a sense, yes. And the jury in the first trial, they couldn't reach a verdict, which meant Wilde wasn't in the clear just yet.
Oh, wow. That must have been an agonizing way, right? Not knowing whether he'd walk free or face imprisonment.
Absolutely. And the uncertainty, well, it didn't last long. The prosecution, they decided to retry the case. And this time they changed their strategy, focusing more directly on Wilde's own words. They used excerpts from his letters, his poetry, even his personal writings to portray him as a man consumed by immoral desires.
That's incredible. Using Wilde's own artistry, his gift for language, as a weapon against him.
It's a truly remarkable twist, isn't it? And this time, well, their tactic worked. The jury found Wilde guilty on several counts of gross indecency, and he was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor, the maximum penalty under the Labouchere Amendment.
2 years of hard labor. That's a devastating sentence, especially for someone like Wilde.
It was a crushing blow. It marked the end of his career. It destroyed his social standing, and it had a profound impact on his health. But perhaps the most tragic consequence was the silencing of his voice.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think of such a brilliant mind being punished for simply being himself.
Yeah.
For loving who he loved. But in a society where homosexuality was so taboo, were there any voices raised in Wilde's defense at all?
There were a few. Some people, they recognized the hypocrisy of Victorian society, pointing out that Wilde was being singled out while others in positions of power engaged in similar behaviors without consequence. And they argued that the Labouchere Amendment was unjust, that it was used to target individuals based on their personal lives rather than any real wrongdoing.
So even in this climate of fear and judgment, there were glimpses of compassion. People willing to question the status quo.
Yes, but those voices, they were drowned out, really, by the overwhelming tide of condemnation. You know, and Wilde's trials, well, they became this symbol of the Victorian era's
Wow.
anxieties, about sexuality and morality. And they reflected a society grappling with change, and choosing fear over acceptance.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always linear. There are often setbacks, moments when prejudice and intolerance prevail. But it's also, I think it's also a testament to the courage of those who dare to challenge injustice, even when the odds are stacked against them.
You're absolutely right. And while Wilde's story is undeniably tragic, it's also a story of resilience. Even in the face of unimaginable hardship, his spirit, his artistry, well, it couldn't be completely extinguished.
So what happened to Wilde after his imprisonment? How did he cope with the aftermath of such a public and devastating fall from grace? We'll delve into that in just a moment when we return for the final part of our deep dive into the trials of Oscar Wilde.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the life and trials of Oscar Wilde. It's been a roller coaster, hasn't it? From those dazzling heights of literary fame to the crushing depths of imprisonment. But Wilde's story, it doesn't end with those prison walls. So let's explore what happened after his release, how his legacy has endured.
Yeah, because even though Wilde's world was shattered, his spirit, though battered, it wasn't completely broken.
He served 2 years of hard labor, right? What happened when he was finally released?
Well, in 1897, Wilde, he walked out of prison a changed man. His health was fragile, his finances, they were depleted, and his reputation was, well, it was in ruins. And he was forced to leave England, actually, adopting the name Sebastian Melmoth, which almost sounds like a character from one of his plays.
It does, doesn't it? Like he was trying to shed his former identity to disappear into the shadows.
Yeah, it's quite fitting considering the circumstances. And he spent his remaining years drifting between France and Italy, living a life, far removed from the glittering salons and the adoring audiences he'd once known.
It's such a stark contrast, isn't it? From the toast of London to a life of exile and obscurity. Did he ever write again?
He did. While in prison, Wilde, he penned the Ballad of Reading Gaol. And it's a hauntingly beautiful poem, really, reflecting on his experiences, behind bars, exploring themes of loss, punishment, and the fragility of the human spirit.
Yeah, it's considered one of his most powerful works, isn't it? A glimpse into the depths of his suffering and resilience.
Absolutely. The Ballad of Reading Gaol, it's a raw, unflinching look at the realities of prison life, but also transcends the personal. It speaks to those universal themes of isolation and redemption and that search for meaning, in the face of despair.
So even though his career was tragically cut short, Wilde's voice continued to resonate through his writing.
Yes. And in a way, his imprisonment, it gave birth to a new kind of artistry, one born out of pain and introspection. And the Ballad of Reading Gaol, well, it stands as a testament to the enduring power of creativity, even in the darkest of times.
Wilde's story, it's a stark reminder, isn't it, of the devastating consequences of prejudice and discrimination.
It is. And his trials and his subsequent downfall, well, they became this turning point, really, in the fight for LGBTQ plus rights.
Yeah.
They exposed the hypocrisy of Victorian society and the cruelty of laws that criminalize love and intimacy.
It's incredible to think that a story that was once shrouded in shame and scandal has become a symbol of hope and resilience for so many.
It is. And Wilde's life and work, they continue to challenge us, I think, to confront our own biases, to question societal norms that limit individual expression, and to fight for a world where love, in all its forms is celebrated rather than condemned.
His legacy reminds us that even in the face of immense adversity, the human spirit can endure, and that art can be this powerful force for change.
It can, and it leaves us with a question. How far have we come since Wilde's time? Have we truly learned from the mistakes of the past? Are we as a society more accepting, more tolerant of those who dare to be different? These are questions, worth pondering as we remember the life and legacy of Oscar Wilde,
Right.
The artist, the rebel, the icon.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the trials of Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
It's a story that continues to resonate today, and it reminds us, I think, of the importance of compassion, of understanding, and the courage to fight for a more just and equitable world.